In this video, we will explore the cases of the oldest prisoners executed in the United States. Men who, after spending decades on death row, ultimately faced their sentence. From their crimes to their last words and final meal. Welcome to Criminal Records. Brandon Astor Jones. State, Georgia. On June 17, 1979, Roger Tackett was working as a manager at a Tenneco convenience store when he was attacked during a robbery. Brandon Astor Jones and Van Roosevelt Solomon entered the store with the intention of robbing it, which resulted in Tackett losing his life. Jones was arrested and, on October 17, 1979, was sentenced to death along with Solomon, who was executed in 1985 by electric chair at the age of 41. In 1989, a federal court ordered that Jones be resentenced after discovering that jurors had brought a Bible into the deliberation room. In 1997, he was once again sentenced to death. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Jones did not make a specific request, so he was served the standard institutional tray, which included chicken and rice, collard greens, seasoned turnip greens, and cornbread. On February 3, 2016, Jones was executed by lethal injection in Georgia. Officials struggled for 45 minutes to insert the IV, initially attempting his left arm, then his right arm, and finally his groin, where a doctor successfully established the connection. He was declared dead at 12:46 a.m. When asked about his last words, Jones made no public statement. He accepted a final prayer and recorded a message for his family, according to the Georgia Department of Corrections. This was the first execution in Georgia in 2016 and the fifth in the United States that year. James Barney Hubbard. State, Alabama. In 1957, James Barney Hubbard was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of David Dockery in Tuscaloosa County. After spending 19 years in prison, he was released in 1976. A year later, he committed another crime. His second victim, Lillian Montgomery, was a 62-year-old store owner who had befriended Hubbard and supported him during his release. After his release from prison, Hubbard moved into her home, located next to the store she ran in Tuscaloosa. On January 10, 1977, Montgomery was found lifeless with 3 gunshot wounds, one in the face, one in the head, and one in the shoulder. Her gold and diamond watch, along with approximately $500 in cash and checks, were stolen. Hubbard claimed they had been drinking whiskey together and said Montgomery had taken her own life, even calling the police to report the incident. However, the evidence revealed it was a homicide. He was arrested shortly afterward and sentenced to death in 1977. He spent almost 3 decades on death row while presenting appeals, arguing that his advanced age and mental deterioration made his execution a cruel and unusual punishment. However, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his appeal in a 5-4 vote, and Alabama Governor Bob Riley denied his clemency request. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Hubbard requested 2 medium-boiled eggs, 4 slices of bacon, sliced tomatoes, fried green tomatoes, pineapple slices with mayonnaise, white bread, a banana, and a medium-sized V8 juice. On August 5, 2004, James Barney Hubbard was executed by lethal injection at Holman Prison near Atmore, Alabama. During the execution, his daughter, Barbara McKinney, watched from an adjacent room, while he maintained eye contact with her until he passed away. Jimmy Montgomery, the victim's son, also witnessed the execution and expressed his dissatisfaction because Hubbard did not say any last words or show any remorse. Hubbard was declared dead at 6:36 p.m., becoming the oldest inmate executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. John Albert Bolts. State, Oklahoma. On April 18, 1984, John Bolts ended the life of his 23-year-old stepson, Doug Kirby, in Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma. That night, after drinking, Bolts broke into his mother-in-law's house and had an argument with his wife. After she threatened to call the police, he left. Later, he called Doug, and after a brief conversation, the young man headed to his stepfather's trailer home. Soon after, Bolts called his wife and said, "I'm going to cut your dear boy's head off." Alarmed, she contacted the police. A neighbor testified that she saw Doug lying on the floor while Bolts was hitting him and shouting obscenities. He then stabbed him with a shiny object. Bolts claimed self-defense, stating that Doug tried to grab a weapon when he arrived at the house. However, a revolver was found in the victim's car, with no traces of blood, despite the seat being covered in it. On November 21, 1984, John Bolts was sentenced to death and spent over 21 years on death row. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Bolts requested fried chicken, potato wedges, baked beans, coleslaw, an apple pie, and a roll. On June 1, 2006, John Albert Bolts was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He was declared dead at 7:22 p.m. When asked about his last words, he said, "This is a moment of joy for me and a moment of sadness. It's a moment of joy because I know I'm going to a better place. It's a moment of sadness because I think about all the people involved who brought me here and what awaits them. It's been many years of pain, and now it all comes down to this." He also mentioned passages from the Old Testament, urging those present to read the book of Deuteronomy. Cecil Clayton. State, Missouri. In 1996, Cecil Clayton ended the life of Sheriff's Deputy Chris Castetter in Missouri. His case attracted attention due to a brain injury he had sustained in 1972, when an accident at a sawmill forced doctors to remove 1/5 of his frontal lobe. His lawyers argued that this damage caused a drastic personality change, affecting his judgment and making him mentally incompetent for the death penalty. Despite appeals based on his condition, the courts determined that Clayton understood his execution, making him eligible for capital punishment. The Supreme Court rejected his request for a stay, and Governor Jay Nixon denied clemency. One day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Clayton requested steak, salad, mashed potatoes with gravy, bread, apple pie, and a glass of milk. On March 17, 2015, Cecil Clayton was executed by lethal injection at the Missouri State Penitentiary. He was declared dead at 9:21 p.m. When asked for his last words, Clayton said, "No, they brought me here to execute me." Thomas Douglas Arthur. State, Alabama. In 1977, Thomas Arthur took the life of Eloise Bray West, his wife's sister, after she refused to reveal his whereabouts. He was sentenced to life in prison. While serving his sentence, Arthur participated in a work release program. During this time, he began a relationship with Judy Wicker, who in 1982 offered him $10,000 to take the life of her husband, Troy Wicker. Arthur accepted the offer and obtained ammunition through an acquaintance. On February 1, 1982, he broke into the Wicker residence disguised with a wig and dark makeup. Troy was shot point-blank in the right eye, causing his immediate death. Judy, in her initial testimony, claimed that an unknown man had attacked her before killing her husband. Authorities discovered inconsistencies in Arthur's alibi and found $2,000 in cash among his belongings. It was determined that Judy had paid him with part of the $90,000 from her husband's life insurance policy. Judy was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, though she later testified against Arthur in exchange for a reduced sentence. Arthur maintained his innocence, but on March 22, 1983, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. His first two convictions were overturned, but the third conviction stood. Arthur faced scheduled executions in 2001, 2007, 2008, 2012, 2015, 2016, and finally in 2017. All were canceled, allowing him to prolong his life on death row. For this reason, he became known as the Houdini of death row, as he managed to elude 7 execution dates before his final one. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Arthur declined the offer, stating, "I don't believe in that last meal nonsense. I never have an appetite. When they're trying to kill you, you're not hungry." On May 26, 2017, Thomas Arthur was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama. He was declared dead at 12:15 a.m. When asked for his final words, he said, "I love you," to his daughter and gave a thumbs-up gesture. In an interview before his execution, Arthur spoke about the impact of his repeated execution dates on his family. "It almost killed my oldest daughter, Sherry," he said. "She came to 6 executions, and the stress of her father being killed was so traumatic that it damaged her heart. She almost lost her business and her home. So I told her to disconnect. I didn't want her to come anymore. She didn't come to the 7th one and won't come to this one." Murray Hooper. State, Arizona. On December 31, 1980, Murray Hooper and 2 other men broke into the home of William Pat Redmond in Phoenix, Arizona. Inside, they bound and gagged Redmond, his wife Marilyn, and her mother Helen Phelps. They then shot them in the head. Marilyn survived the attack and testified against Hooper during the trial. Authorities stated that the murders were ordered by a man who wanted to take control of Redmond's printing business. Hooper was sentenced to death and spent more than 4 decades on death row. Over the years, his attorneys unsuccessfully attempted to have DNA and fingerprint tests performed on the evidence in the case. They also argued that Marilyn Redmond's identification of Hooper had changed over time, and that some witnesses had received benefits in other criminal cases in exchange for testifying against him. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Hooper requested Kentucky Fried Chicken, macaroni and cheese, barbecue sauce, a biscuit, cheesecake, 2 pints of Neapolitan ice cream, and a large Fanta soda. On November 16, 2022, Murray Hooper was executed by lethal injection at the Florence State Prison in Arizona. During the procedure, there were difficulties inserting the intravenous lines, which delayed the execution. Eventually, the sedative pentobarbital was administered through the femoral artery. Before the execution began, Hooper smiled, waved at the witnesses, and said, "It's all been said. Let it be done." He also addressed his lawyers, friends, and family, saying, "Don't cry for me, don't be sad." Minutes later, his body stopped moving, and he was declared dead at 10:09 a.m. Clarence Ray Allen. State, California. In 1974, Clarence Ray Allen planned the robbery of Fran's Market, a grocery store in Fresno, California, owned by Ray and Fran Schladewitz. Allen, who already had a criminal record, involved his son, Roger Allen, and other accomplices, including Ed Zavala, Carl Mayfield, and Charles Jones. During the robbery, $500 in cash and $10,000 in money orders were stolen. After the robbery, Allen gathered his accomplices to discuss the need to eliminate Mary Sue Kitts, who was related to his son and had been talking too much about the crime. The group unanimously voted for her death, and Allen killed her, an act described as retaliation for the fear that she would talk. Even while incarcerated, Allen continued to orchestrate crimes from prison, conspiring with his cellmate Billy Ray Hamilton to murder key witnesses. In 1980, with the help of his girlfriend, Hamilton committed the murders of Brian Schledowitz, Josephine Rocha, and Douglas White, while 2 others were injured. These crimes were orchestrated by Allen, who sought to ensure his exoneration of previous charges. After his arrest, Allen was convicted of the murders and the conspiracy to murder witnesses, receiving the death penalty in 1982. Over the years, Allen appealed his sentence, arguing that his advanced age and physical condition made him unsuitable for execution. However, the court rejected his appeals, and in 2005, California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger denied his pardon. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Allen requested buffalo meat, fried bread, a bucket of KFC chicken, sugar-free pecan pie, sugar-free walnut ice cream, and whole milk. On January 17, 2006, Clarence Ray Allen was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison, California. During the execution, an additional dose of lethal potassium was required to stop his heart. Allen was declared dead at 12:38 a.m., and before his death, his final words were, "Hoka, hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you all. I love you all. Goodbye." John B. Nixon. State, Mississippi. On January 2, 1985, John B. Nixon Sr. was convicted of the contract killing of 45-year-old Virginia Tucker. Nixon, accompanied by his son John Nixon Jr. and Gilbert Jimenez, broke into the Tucker home. Nixon pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and said, "I've got something for you." Thomas Tucker, who had married Virginia just 6 months earlier, quickly realized that the men had been hired by his wife's ex-husband. Thomas offered money to save their lives, but Nixon responded, "That's not what I'm after." The deal is already done. Nixon shot Thomas, who managed to escape despite being hit twice. Nixon then took Jimenez's gun and shot Virginia in the head while Jimenez held her down. Nixon and his accomplices fled the scene. Thomas survived and was able to identify Nixon. The man who hired the killers, Elster Joseph Ponthieu, was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. Nixon's sons, Henry Leon Nixon and John B. Nixon Jr., were convicted on lesser charges related to the plot. Jimenez, who testified against the others, received a 20-year sentence. Nixon was sentenced to death on March 26, 1986, and spent over 19 years on death row. During this time, he attempted to appeal his conviction, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Nixon requested a well-done T-bone steak, buttered asparagus, a baked potato with sour cream, peach pie, vanilla ice cream, and sweet tea. On December 14, 2005, at 6:25 p.m., John B. Nixon Sr. was executed by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman, Mississippi. He was the first person executed in Mississippi in 2005 and the 7th in the state since 1976. When asked for his final words, he said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for the world. I'm sorry for myself. And I'm sorry for the family. I did not kill Virginia Tucker. I know in my heart, and it pains me to admit it, that it was my son and a Spanish friend, and another man from Jackson." John B. Nixon Sr. was pronounced dead at 6:35 p.m. Carl Wayne Bunchen. State, Texas. On June 27, 1990, Carl Wayne Bunchen shot and killed Officer James Irby in Houston, Texas. At the time, Bunchen was on parole after serving time for sexually assaulting a minor. He was a passenger in a vehicle that Officer Irby pulled over for a routine traffic stop. After a brief conversation, Bunchen exited the car and, without warning, shot Irby in the head. As the officer fell to the ground, Bunchen fired again, striking him in the back. After killing Irby, he continued shooting at bystanders while attempting to steal a car before being arrested. In 1991, a jury sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned his sentence in 2009, but in 2012, a new trial reinstated his death sentence. In 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court denied his final appeal, clearing the way for his execution. A day before his execution, he was offered a last meal, but it was not specified what he requested. On April 21, 2022, at the age of 78, Bunchen was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas, becoming the oldest person ever executed in the state. Before his death, Bunchen addressed Officer Irby's family. "I want the Irby family to know one thing. I regret what I did. I pray to God that they get closure for having their father killed and Mrs. Irby's husband taken away. To all my friends who have stood by me all these years, I'm not going to say goodbye, just see you later. I'm ready to go to heaven, Warden." Outside the prison, dozens of motorcyclists, including Houston police officers and retired members of motorcycle clubs, revved their engines at the time of the execution. Witnesses described the noise as disturbing, with some calling it disrespectful and disgusting. Bunchen was pronounced dead at 6:39 p.m. At the time of his execution, he had spent 31 years on death row. Bigler Stouffer II. State, Oklahoma. Bigler Stouffer II was executed for the 1985 murder of Linda Reeves. Throughout his trial, Stouffer maintained his innocence, claiming that Reeves was already dead when he arrived at the house, while her companion, Doug Ivins, had been severely wounded. However, prosecutors argued that Stouffer killed Reeves and shot Ivins in an attempt to gain access to a $2 million life insurance policy while being involved with Ivins' ex-wife. In 2003, Stouffer was sentenced to death after his original sentence was overturned. Despite multiple legal efforts to halt his execution, arguing that lethal injection was inhumane, the Supreme Court denied his appeal shortly before the execution. After 19 years of appeals, Stouffer was finally executed in 2022. A day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Stouffer requested a chicken sandwich, 2 slices of bread, French fries, broccoli, mixed fruit, 2 cookies, a fruit drink, and a bottle of water. On December 9, 2021 at 10 a.m., Stouffer was administered the lethal injection. He was declared unconscious at 10:07 a.m. and pronounced dead at 10:16 a.m., with no reported complications. His last words were, "My request is that my Father forgive them. Thank you." Stouffer continued to assert his innocence in Linda Reeves' murder and prayed for God to forgive those carrying out his execution. In an interview prior to his execution, Stouffer stated that he believed life without parole was worse than death, and that he was grateful and at peace with his clemency being denied. At 79 years and 2 months old, Stouffer became the oldest person ever executed in Oklahoma, and the second oldest in the U.S., following Walter Moody, who was convicted of killing a federal judge in 1989. Additionally, Stouffer was the second inmate executed in Oklahoma after the state resumed executions in October 2021. Walter Leroy Moody, Jr., State, Alabama. On December 16, 1989, federal judge Robert Smith Vance was at his home in Mountain Brook, Alabama, when he opened a package containing a homemade. The explosion instantly ended his life and severely injured his wife, Helen. 2 days later, civil rights attorney Robert E. Robinson was killed in a similar explosion at his office in Savannah, Georgia. Authorities launched an extensive investigation that led to the capture of Walter Leroy Moody Jr. and his wife, Susan McBride, on July 13, 1990. McBride was released on bail and testified against Moody in exchange for immunity. Prosecutors determined that Moody had mailed multiple bombs, including one to the 11th Circuit Court headquarters in Atlanta and another to the NAACP office in Jacksonville, Florida, in an attempt to divert attention from his responsibility in Judge Vance's murder. In a federal trial, Moody was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 7 life terms. Later, an Alabama state court sentenced him to death for the murder of Judge Vance, a sentence handed down on February 13, 1997. A day before his execution, he was offered a last meal. Moody requested a Philly cheesesteak, a Dr. Pepper, and M&Ms. On April 19, 2018, Moody was executed by lethal injection at Holman Prison in Alabama. He was pronounced dead at 8:42 p.m. When asked for his final words, Moody declined to make a statement. At 83 years and 26 days old, he became the oldest prisoner executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976.